I will teach you how you can rapidly create your own chat interface, which allows you to chat with any AI model of your choice and fully customize the experience. By the end of this video, you will have an interface like this, which will allow you to chat with any model and get the responses right there. We will be writing this code using vanilla JavaScript. Now, in case you are more familiar with a specific framework like Vue, React, or Angular, there's no need to worry because you can easily adapt the code for any of those frameworks. So with that being said, I'm going to teach you the fundamental knowledge you need to create such a chat interface and to extend it whichever way you want. So let's get started. In this sample project, we have an HTML file, which is just simple bootstrap code that any web developer should be familiar with, together with some CSS to just do some basic styling. This ensures that we have a nice container for the chat, that we have different styling for the user message and the assistance message, and of course we have a little bit of JavaScript already. Now the reason why I prepared some of this code beforehand is because that kind of code is just related to web development in general and not so much plugging this in with an actual AI system. So what we see here is that we are setting up the API URL for the AI system, and I'm using a locally hosted model. If you want to learn more about that, I will tell you later how you can actually find out how to host your own AI model locally for free. But for now, let's continue with what we're working on here. We're setting up all of the element references because we need them later to insert messages into the web page. We of course have an array for storing our messages, and then we can actually have a look at adding the message to the HTML of the page as well, because we keep track of them in an array, but of course we need to show it in the actual HTML of the page. Now, the method we're actually going to extend is this send message method. Send message is a method that is supposed to query our AI API. And it does this by checking, first of all, if this checkbox is checked, this checkbox where it says enable streaming. And we will get to what this actually means a little bit later, and we will definitely implement this because it's necessary for any proper AI application. But what you see here is that there's a to-do. We need to implement the method handle stream and handle non-stream. Because if we go to the interface on the left here, if I go ahead and type a message like, hey, what's up? And I press send, you will see that nothing happens. And if we check our console, you can see that handle non-stream is not defined. So we are going to define those methods together, and then you will learn how to properly call the AI model APIs. So first, we're just going to do the handle non-stream method because it's the simpler of the two. And this is just a basic HTTP request. There's nothing special about this. So what we can do is kind of check what this gives us in between, right? So what we're going to do is let's just log that chat response, and I think we can just convert it to JSON already, but I think I need to actually await this as well. Yes, because body JSON is also an async method. So let's try that again. And there you go. Now you see that we are getting a chat completion. That was a pretty quick one, of course, because it's just a simple message and the AI system is saying not much, just here to help and chat if you'd like. Okay, nice. So now we actually need to make sure that we return that message content. So instead of just logging this, let's actually return the chat response JSON. We go into the choices array. That seems to be correct. We take the first array value, then we check the message and we check the content. Now, of course, things can go wrong here. You can wrap this in all kinds of error catching methods, but this suffices for now, right? So I think now that we're returning the message, this should work. So I'm going to refresh the page, type what's up. Let's actually check our network tab, and you can see that it's sending that request and getting an answer pretty quickly. So that's pretty cool. And you see the message is showing up pretty fast, right? However, what happens if we ask the model a more complicated question? So for example, can you write me a complex story? When we do this and I press send, you can see the request is pending, but it's taking quite some time to resolve. And in the meantime, the user's not getting any feedback whatsoever. It's just waiting and waiting and waiting. And if you have a background system, this works okay. But if you have an actual user interface, this is obviously a pretty poor UX, right? Now at the end, you do see that the content is being returned. It's a pretty big string. You can also see that in the chat. But this is not really a great user experience. The user has to wait for a long time and doesn't even know if our application is working or not. And so this is really why we want to implement this concept of streaming, so that the answer is returned to the user interface chunk by chunk. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement that handle stream method. I'm going to define a new function in here. I'm going to call it handle stream because we already have a reference set up. And actually what we need to do in here is do something very similar. We need to create a very similar fetch request, but we actually have to pass an optional parameter to say stream true. Now, before I continue, this is not a good practice. I'm copy pasting code. We need to stay dry, which means don't repeat yourself. So instead of keeping the code like this, we need to do a small refactor and extract this fetch method into just a small helper method. And we're just going to return chat response like so. Now, the way that the response needs to be handled will be done by the handle non-stream and handle stream methods. So what we still need to do here is replace this fetch request by just calling that call chat API method and say false for stream. I'm going to prove that by refreshing the page and then typing hello. Let's go ahead and send it. Pretty quick response, right? So that's still functional. It's always good to test your code as you're iterating it. But now our handle stream method is still unfinished. Now, before I'm going to just implement a bunch of code that you might not understand, let's first log this to give you an idea of what happens when you call these AI APIs with the streaming parameter set to true. I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to then check out my developer console. So this, of course, doesn't do anything special because I do have to press the enable streaming button. That makes sense. I'm going to send it, and we get a response. Now, if we check the body of the response, we see that it's a readable stream. So it's not a simple JSON object. We have to actually read the stream and parse it ourselves. And this is going to take some time to teach you, so bear with me. What we first need to do is we need to set up a reader. So we define a reader on the body of the chat response. This will allow us to read the stream. What we also need to do is basically set up a text decoder, which is a standard method that's available to browsers. And this is going to be used to make sure that we can actually decode the stream as it's coming in into regular text. Because what you have to understand is at this point, it's not really a normal HTTP REST API anymore. It's a little bit more custom. It's actually, in the case of my API, called an event stream, but it could be a different type of stream. And by teaching you how to actually read the stream, you can make this work regardless of what kind of stream your AI is actually using. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to also define the message div and full content because we basically want to present the message as it's coming in to the user, right? So we also need to update the UI as it's generating. I'm going to set up a while true method, and this is one of those semi-dangerous loops because if you don't break out of it properly, you can of course just, keep your code stuck running in a loop. So this is just a proof of concept method of doing this, but you should probably set up some kind of way to make sure that this is not an actual infinite loop. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set a pair of variables. And this is going to be the result of what happens when you read the stream with the reader. Now, streams do indicate when they're done. So this is what the server is basically going to tell you when it's done streaming. So if we're done streaming, we want to break out and we know that we are done with the actual message generation. But if we are not done, we want to use that decoder to decode the value of the stream. And the reason you need a decoder is just because, again, it's not yet a simple string or anything like that. You need to use a decoder to turn it into that. Whenever you're using all of these libraries that do HTTP requests for you, and whenever you're using methods like this one here, where you're actually changing the response body into JSON, These are examples of where code is doing that for you, but we have to do it ourselves because there are many different ways that we might need to parse this AI message. So what we're going to do now is we're going to split the value by new line. I want to actually show you why this is what we need to do. So if we see the developer console here, we can actually see that we have this request to chat completions, which is a streaming request which returns an event stream. Now, effectively, this is just a bunch of JSON objects which are prefixed by this data key, and they're all split by new lines. And that is an important thing to understand. Every valid data object in this case is split by new line. Now, it's really important to know that it's not guaranteed that every chunk that you're getting in from the server is one whole JSON object, or in this case, a JSON object prepended with data. It could be more, it could be less. So you have to make sure that you split by new line so that you know that every time that this decoder is giving you some value to process, that it's actually a valid object like this. Because then you can deterministically say, okay, I want to actually parse this as a JSON object and then retrieve whatever message content the AI has generated so far. Now, it's also good to note that if we scroll to the right, you can see here that you will see that the content values are all just iterating on each other. So it's not like it returns the full message up to that point. It just returns whatever new thing that it has generated. And so you will need to add all of these strings to each other to generate the final full message. Okay, so with that background information, we're going to split by new line again, as I said. And then what we're going to do is for each line, we're going to execute some code. What we want to do is if the line starts with data, which again is pretty reliable, like the server always, in this case, starts with data. But then we also want to check if the line does not start with data done, or rather the line is not literally that. We might see that in here. Yeah, in this case, our server always returns it as our final chunk, which is another way of knowing that it's basically finished generating. Whenever we know that it is something that we actually need to parse, then we actually make sure that we have the content, and we get this by now parsing JSON. The way we're going to do that is we're going to slice the line, and we're going to slice it at index 6. This gets rid of basically this data prefix, which we know is always there. And then we can just say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and, once that's parsed, get the choices object, then get the first value, and then I'm going to go delta content. And if that's not present for whatever reason, I guess we can just return an empty string. And then I'm going to add that new content to the full content. Again, because we are responsible for keeping track of the full message. And then what I'm also going to do, of course, is if there's a message div, I'm going to add that to the message. So again, because while the message is being generated, we want to make sure that the user can see that the message is being generated by the AI system. That's the whole point of doing this, right? So we're going to use that add message helper method to make sure that in the front end, the user will be able to see the message. Okay, that's cool. And then in the end, what I do also want to do is probably just return the full content once we are done. Let's see if I'm doing that in the right place. I think I should just do it once the loop is finished, because this full content is still going to be used later in the code. If we go here, we can see that the AI content will also be pushed into the messages again. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now what we're going to do is see if this code works. I'm going to refresh the page and type in, hey, what's up? And of course, this is not using streaming, so it appears in one chunk. Now I'm going to enable streaming and try it again. And we do seem to have some issue. Oh, I need to do plus equals. There you go. So I only had a plus here, which means that I'm just adding the content to full content, but I'm not then actually changing the original variable. I'm just, basically generating the string on line 61, and then it will just be gone from the memory afterwards. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually do plus equals. And I think that is probably the mistake that I made. So that's fine. Let's go ahead and enable streaming again and tell it again. Tell me a story. And now it works. Okay, so this happens, of course, and you can see that issues are fixed pretty easily if you actually know what you're doing. And that's really the intent behind this tutorial as well. Now, here's some super important information. In the description below, I've noted links to the code that I used at the beginning of the video, so you can rewatch the video again and code with me from beginning to end. Here is a video that you can watch to deploy your locally running AI model in just 10 minutes on your own computer. And lastly, in the next coming weeks, I'll be covering more topics for how to actually code and bring your AI projects to life. So if you thought this video was very helpful and added value, then go ahead and follow me on YouTube, because I'll be bringing way more to the community with videos like this.